Welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to look at animating and UV and texturing. We're going to start a bit backwards. So normally you would texture first and then create the animation. But we're going to show you how to kind of set some keyframes and then UV unwrap just in for this session only. So animation. So the first thing that I want you to do is to take your workspace from Maya Classic to animation, which is about halfway down here, and that's going to change our load up to an animation friendly workspace. We'll change this display from these 4 windows by pushing this button here on the left hand side, which will take us to our perspective view. So obviously, as part of the project, you are creating a collectible item for your first-person shooter game, and so we're thinking back to kind of the classic, old school sort of GTA San Andreas and especially GTA 1, 2, 3. They'd often have like a gun or a health pack or some ammunition floating in space, spinning around to signify that you could collect that content from there. So I'm going to show you how to sort of do a similar thing. So we're going to go to Create, and we're going to go to Polygon Primitives, and we're going to go into the helix. Okay, and when the helix is created in the middle, we're just going to go in and we'll just rename this as mechanic part. Okay, so remember, just get used to renaming your assets. Really important step that's often overlooked by beginners. And we're going to increase the height of this slightly, and I'm quite happy with it looking like that. So the reason I've picked this shape is that when we animate this sort of spinning on the spot, it's going to be more visually interesting. In fact, we'll put the height to 5. Then in Translate Y, so with that standing in the inputs, and then on Translate Y, I want you to put 2.5, which would then almost taking to the top there. So we'll just do 2.6. Okay, we'll go for 3. That seems to have done it. And then I'm just going to turn off this grid section here so we can see it nice and isolated. So what we're going to do, because we want Translate Y, for animation, we don't want these extra values. So when we animate, obviously we're manipulating space, and these values will change depending where the object is within that space. So if we always want it to return home to its start point, its start position, we need this position to read as 0. So first, what I'm going to do is go to Modify and Freeze Transformations. Freezing those transformations will clear these back to 0. So now you can see Translate Y is on 0, and we're now living nice and easily up in the on top of the grid. So what we're going to do is look at the timeline features and set this up to run accordingly. So this is our timeline. This means we can scroll through time and look at individual frames. Here we have the time slider. So if we're focusing on one element of time, we can focus in on that, or we can expand and decrease that restriction. Okay, so just a few frames or quite a lot. And when we play back, it will only play back what is visible here. So that's something that can be really nice if you're focusing on just one particular part of animation. So the outer line is essentially the max capacity of the timeline, and its inner side values control the time slider here. And as you see, if we move it along, both of these values on the left and to the right change. We're going to set our overall one from 1, so that's fine. So that's 1, and we're going to have it end at 60 frames per second. 60 frames, but for the time being we're going to set 24, and the reason I'm doing that is because by default, you'll see down here, my animation is set to play at 24 frames per second. Okay, so we want a 1 second loop, and we're going to put it on 60 frames per second. Again, 60 frames per second rendering rate is kind of seen as the optimized version for gaming consoles currently. So we're going to work to that means. So down on the right here, we're going to go into the animation settings by clicking on this little running man. Okay. If you can't see the little running man, you can go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, go to Preferences, and you can go to the animation section from there. But we actually don't want that one. Sorry, ignore that. There's animation there, but we actually want the time slider. Okay, down here. So on the time slider, the playback rate is 24 frames a second. We want to change that to 60, so we're going to scroll down to 60 frames per second. And everything else should be fine. We've just got to make sure that you have the 60 frames per second times 1 times the normal playback speed. So if you have it on play every frame, it's going to go super fast after the first time of playing through. It'll start off going normal speed. After that, for some reason, it will loop super fast. If we play at 60 times 1, that will play at real time. 60 times 0.5, that will play at half speed. And 60 times 2 will play at double speed. So we want 60 frames per second times 1. And we're going to click save. Okay, and now our time slider has gone from 24 frames to 60. You'll notice at the bottom, however, it's on 2.5, so something's got lost in that calculation. So we're just going to go in and type 1 and type 1 again, and we're just going to click on frame 1 down the bottom to ensure that we're there. So at frame 1, I'm going to push S, which sets that keyframe, and I'm going to then click on frame 60, and I'm going to go to rotate Y, and I'm going to type in 360, push enter, and push S again. If I don't push S, it won't record it. I'm just going to undo that by pushing Ctrl Z. You see here, these are faint pink. If I push S, that means there's a keyframe set. That dark blood red indicates that it's set. If you look on the time slider, you'll see that we have 2 lovely red marks. The software will calculate all that space in between. So as you see, as I scrub along the time slider, you can see that happens. So if I play that back by pushing play, just give it a minute. Now you will see we've got this weird kind of jerking pause every so often. Okay, and that's quite an unnatural kind of movement, and we don't want to retain that. We actually want to lose that. So if you take a look at the time slider here on the graph editor, so this window, this panel here is the graph editor. On the left hand side, you have all the parameters and inputs for this object, which you can find on here and down here. And on the here we have the curve, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. And along here we have various settings, and we'll talk through some of those today. So by pushing this red square, I've now framed the curve. So this curve is, I'm just going to isolate the rotate, is the division of time and space. So across here we have time, just like we have time going across on this time slider. And over here, these yellow icons are keyframes. And this line is basically calculating how much it should move at any given point. So these curves are the reason we're having that pause. So this here is an ease out. The space and time isn't changing much. So as we move through time, the value is not increasing very much. It starts increasing steadily here, and as we get through the center, it maximizes, and then as we come to the end, it starts to ease back in. So it eases out and eases in. This is an animation principle, and by default, Maya will set it to ease out and ease in, because things naturally have that sense of movement when they happen. We actually want to change this to a linear path. We don't want that pause. We don't want ease in and ease out. We actually just want to change it. So I'm going to select this piece here, and I'm going to select this icon here that looks a little bit like a lollipop. And if we select that corner there and click it again, the same thing will happen. And now we have an even division of time and space. So every second, the same amount of value is being increased. And now we have a really nice, clean turn around for that. So that is how you can create a nice, clean moving asset. I could also, for example, go in and I could add a bounce to this. So on the Y value, I'm going to keep it a 0 at the start and at the end. Well, then in the middle of frame 30, I'm actually just going to take it up 1. Okay, I'm going to push S, which will record that. And if I go on to translate Y, you'll now see we have that ease in. If we have linear tangents on this, it's going to hit the top and bottom really heavy and move back, and it's going to actually feel weird. So, you know, it kind of feels a bit weird really quick. So what I'm going to do is actually keep that on the with ease out and ease in, and that should then give it a nice kind of floating feel. Okay, it's a little less stiff, it's a little less solid. So with regards to the mechanic part, I mean, there are other things you could perhaps play around with keying. I've never tried keying one of these before, but I'm going to try it. Let's say the coils. Okay, I'm going to delete that, and in fact, actually in the middle, I'm going to have it increase the coils by 1. Let's do it by 1. Sorry, by 4. Increase it to 1, 2, 4. I'm going to push S. And if I play that back, will that decrease or will it pop? Okay, it actually does increase. That's weird. So we get some weird results happening here. Okay, which make it feel a little bit. It's quite mesmerizing to look at. So you can play around with all sorts of parameters, make all sorts of changes. Actually, don't like that, so I'm actually going to delete that. And that's what we can do. So you've now learned the basics of keying and animation, ensuring the settings are accurately set up for the purpose you're intending, and how to kind of clean up the graph editor to control the movement and the time over space that's been divided. So I'm going to select this object, and I'm going to turn the visibility off. In fact, actually, because we've set keys on the visibility, we're going to have to go to visibility and just delete all of those. By pushing the delete key, don't push backspace, and then I'm just going to type in 0 there. So, our next step. So we're going to look now at UV unwrapping and preparing an object for that. So I'm going to change my workspace to UV editing. And in here, you'll now see this is where our objects will form, and we'll be able to edit the UV around here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an image plane. You can do that by going to create polygon primitives and plane as well. And we'll open up the dialog box, and we're going to set the height and width to 10. And we're going to set the divisions to 1 and 1 on these subdivisions, okay? We're going to click create, and you'll see that we now have that in the space. So basically what you're looking at here is if we was to bring in an image, let's say of a plank, you will see that that forms nicely into this grid, and that's if we attach it to the object where it will appear. So this square here will appear almost here on that object. So with that selected, we're just going to go into the settings. We want the channel box to come back up, so I'm just going to click on, that's the attribute, there's the channel box, and I'm just going to slide the channel box in there. So it obviously isn't on here by default. So what we're going to do is just rotate the object 90 degrees on rotate X. Okay, and from that there we'll have that facing forward. So I'm then going to hold down onto the object. Oh, and I'm going to go. Oh, I've accidentally clicked something there. My apologies. So we'll just wait for that to undo. Doesn't look like it's going to undo. So let me just delete all of that. Okay, so back to our plane. And what we're going to do is hold down the right mouse button, and there we go. Must have been a bit buggy. And we're going to go down to face. We're going to select the front face, and I'm going to push Control E. And I'm going to then select the small square. So we've covered extrusion modeling, so you should know how to do this. I'm going to pull this down, and I'm then going to push Control E again for extrude and push it in. Okay, and we want it about 3/4 along this first sort of square. We don't want it to cover the whole square. And from this point, you'll see there is a black face. If we click on the middle there, you'll see it's actually a whole square. If we push delete on that, we're then going to be left with our object. Okay, and you'll see that this face is here. So what I'm going to do at this point is we're going to attach a material to this object. So clicking on this eye icon at the top here, this will load up some shaders, and from this we're going to go into the into favorites. And basically the three that we're going to kind of focus on at the moment are the Lambert, the Blinn, and the Fung. So a Lambert is a really diffuse surface. So if you look at a piece of fabric with a light shining on it almost, and how the light reacts on there, that essentially it's very shaded, and actually it's what Maya creates by default, applies by default, which you can be seen here, Lambert 1. A Blinn is slightly shinier. So if I create a Blinn and I assign that to this object, you'll see that as I sort of scroll past, you will now see a shine sort of taking place on that object. Okay. And if I create a Fung and assign that to it, it will look very similar to the Blinn, but it will be a lot shinier. Okay, so it's a lot more intense. So Fung is like a really reflective metallic material, or like a snooker ball, and the Blinn is in between that of the Lambert and the Fung, and it's slightly diffused but still has shine on it, like a piece of matted textured plastic. So with that in mind, we're going to be turning this into a wooden crate. I'm actually just going to keep with the Lambert. So I'm going to create a new Lambert, and I think I've just lost the material node. No, we're good. So I've held down the right mouse button and gone to assign material to viewport selection. And then from this, we're going to attach an image. So I've gone online, I've found a random texture, and what I'm going to do is click on the Lambert. I'm going to attach an image file to this. So I'm going to set this list on color. These are the attributes of the texture. So up here is our library. All of our textures appear up here. Here you can find different surfaces, and in here is where we can play around with the node connections. And on the right here is the attributes for the textures, and there's a preview. So if I select on the color and then go to File, and you'll see it's now attached in. Then on the file, we can actually search for some images. So if we go in and click on the face, and if we go into, I think I might have one on my desktop. So if I go back into here, animation, we want this one, resources, 3D, and here's like a wooden plant texture. And so I'm going to bring that in. And I'm now going to just assign this to this object. So I'm going to hold down the right mouse button on the Lambert. You can also do that from up here. Assign material to selection, and voila, it's now attached. However, as you can see, nothing is visible. It doesn't mean it's not attached. It basically is the shading that's been rendered on our viewport. So if we go to shading and turn on hardware texturing, you will now see we have the wood texture attached. So you'll see some weird things happening. In the middle, everything looks great. It looks fine, that's how it should be, because we have our grid spread out along here. But around the edges and on the inside, we actually have this weird kind of shape happening. Now, basically, what's happening here is this face, so from this edge to this edge, is all contained within that single little strip. So it's actually reading a single pixel and spreading it or calculating it along the edge. So obviously we actually need to change that. So we actually have to re-unpack, reopen up the UV edits of this object. So I'm going to hold down the right mouse button and go to face mode. And I'm actually going to select 4 faces. And as you see, as I select it, the bar around here turns red as well. So watch the bottom bar as I click it, changes colour, and now the one on the left. Okay. If I go to UV and go to planner, I'm not going to click planner, but I'm going to click on the small dialog box next to it. And now we have a range of settings. So I'm just going to try it on. We want it to project from rotate Z, and I'll show you why. If I do X and click apply, it's reading it across, and now the lines have travelled across. If I do Y, it's now reading it from above and spreading the other way. If I go from Z, it's now facing the front of that object, which means it's now lining up really nicely on our object here. So actually, if we take a look at this now, our faces here and here are fine because the wood grain is following that line. But our ones on the side, not so good. Doesn't look natural. So we need to actually change this relationship. So I'm going to hold down the right mouse button and go to Edge. And I'm going to double click on each corner, and that should select. In fact, we'll just select, we won't double click, we'll just click once, and we'll select each corner piece. And then we're going to go to UV. If you can't see this menu, go here and change it to modeling. And go to UV and go to cut UV edges. Okay. Once that cuts, if we go back and select the face, there we go, and I'll push W. If I go to the UV editor, I can now actually move and realign these. So these top ones are fine, but we actually need to rotate this top. So I'm going to take this and I'll push E. I'm actually just going to rotate it around so it sits quite nicely in there. Okay, and if we take a look at that, you'll see now that the wood grain actually follows the way we want it to go. Okay. Okay, so with those lined up, we're now going to look at the inside, and as you can see, we've got this stretch happening on here as well. Now the problem is we can't, so if I select all 4 of these faces in this loop, if I was to go back into UV and go to our planner window, and if we start to unwrap from the X, you'll see that whilst we're getting something from the sides, it's not perfect. Because these top faces are still in, so even if we was to rotate this and go, yep, okay, they're now following the right direction, the actual top parts and the bottom part aren't. If we go onto Y-axis, a similar thing will happen. This time it will go across okay, but it won't go up and down. Okay. And then finally from the Z-axis, if we go across, and then it will fill in from there. And it's the same thing where we've now got where we were at the beginning, sorry. Right, so we actually need to use something different. So for this part, we're actually going to go to UV and we're going to go into spherical. And this time, in fact, actually, no, let's try it with the cylinder first. If we go into cylindrical, we'll click project, and you'll see that we now have this icon. So we're getting bits at the sides, at the bottoms, we're still getting that stretch, and basically our layout is currently all over this. So what we're going to do, first of all, is click on this icon here, which will bring up this tool set. This will allow us to manipulate the cylinder. Okay, so if we bring it over, and you'll see that as we bring that around, we've now got a line taking place over here. And if we go to scale, we can scale that up, but it's not having too much of an influence, but we're getting a more accurate kind of length on the inside. So actually I'm just going to keep scaling that up a little bit more, so you'll see that we're getting a nice kind of strip there. And we've got it. Now the issue is that it doesn't all fit onto here, and if I was to actually move this by pushing W, you'll see we're actually dragging all of this stuff with us. So what we're going to do is actually cut these up. So I'm going to go in, back to edge mode, by holding down the right mouse button, going to edge. Then I'm going to select the edges over here, and that one's already been done, I think. And yeah, because that's this end here, so actually we can unselect that by holding Shift and selecting it. And then we'll go to UV, and I'm going to cut that up. So cut UV edges. So now they're cut. If I go into face and select that, I should now be able to move that in. And I'm actually just going to place it roughly in the middle here. And I'm just going to go around and select each of these. And I'm just going to put them into, try and fill out some of these empty bars as much as possible. But there will be some overlap by the looks of it. And then from this, we're going to just scale it up. So at the moment you can see it's not too detailed. Which face of I actually moving in this one. And you'll see now as I scale that up, we get much better resolution on that grain in there. So if we do the same again here. And again, select this face and do the same. Actually, just going to move this in, it's drifted a little. So these aren't 100% accurate, but that's not always a bad thing. It gives a bit of variation and it changes things. Obviously, things in nature aren't always perfectly clean and smooth. Even a crate like this that's a human-made object. So now we have our object with the texture in, and it's looking quite nice. So from this point, we want to actually make a crate. So because we made the object, so we're actually just going to change our window here to Maya Classic. And I'm just going to rename this Q face. And what we're going to do is we know that our width is 10 and we're going to want to rotate this around. To create that shape around, we actually need it to rotate at half. It needs to be forward by half of the actual width of it. So we're going to go on to translate Z and type in 5. Now, if I was to rotate at this point, it rotates from here. And actually, we want it to pivot and turn from this point here. So to do that, I'm going to push Insert. If you're on a Mac, it's the up arrow by the FN key. And from there, I'm going to hold down the X key, which is snap on the grid. And I'm just going to drag that into the center. I need to push Insert again to turn that orientation off for the pivot. And if I take the object now and spin it around, you'll see it now rotates from where we wanted. So what I'm going to do now is, rather than duplicate this one by one and turn it, we're going to go to Edit and Duplicate Special. From this point, we're going to rotate 90, and we're going to put 4 copies in. Okay, and we're going to click 3 copies, sorry, 3, not 4. I'm going to click Apply. And now you'll see that we've now had a rotation take place. Okay, so from this point onwards, we're going to copy this on the sides. So actually, we'll go into and that back to 0, and then we'll copy it to 1, and we're just going to put 90 and 90 into these values here and click Apply. And that didn't go the way that I wanted it to, so let's just take that to 0, apply again, there we go, and it would have been Y that we wanted to turn around maybe. So let's try the 90 on here, click Apply. I think because of the ordering of these, it's not going to work. So what we will do is, if I undo that again, that's fine. We'll try 90, 0, 90, and sometimes it's just experimenting to get the thing that you want. There we go. So now I've rotated this, but I've actually changed the direction that the planks are going. Now this time we're going to do that, but this time we're going to do it on -90. So we're going to type in -90, click apply. Make sure you've got this front one selected again. Click apply. There we go. So we now have a full crate made, ready to kind of go. If this was a game, we probably wouldn't make the bottom. If it was going into a game and this was going to be on the ground. But as an entry level kind of bit of modeling and UV editing, we've now got a nice looking box. Okay. So have a go. Get on your blog. I'll be interested to see what else you can do with this. So please feel free to show. And